Okay, Nante, I think we are good to go.
Okay, thank you, Katrina. Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Nante. I am a co-chair for the Purple Network. And I will explain a little bit what is Purple Network. So Purple Network is for staff with hidden or visible disability, physical disability, neurodiverse or mental health conditions in CUH. And we have allies. You don't have to be disabled to be part of the network. This is a space where it gives opportunity for disabled staff to share their concern, raise them in a safe space. So you don't have to be disabled to join the Purple Network. And this month of December is the Disability History Month. Disability History Month is an opportunity to celebrate the lives and achievement of people living with a disability or health conditions. And we had one of the webinars we had was a chronically working workshop, which was in July. And you can catch up on Facebook if you want to watch that back. And it will soon be on our staff portal. I'm just gonna explain a little bit about this session. So it will be recorded with Hati's permission, of course. And there will be question and answers after Hati has spoken, and you can write your questions on the question and answer function. I'm going to stop rambling now and introduce Hati Lowland Davis, Chair of both Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust and Princess Alexandra Hospital NHS Trust, and a founding member of Disabled NHS Directors Network. Over to you, Hati.
Thank you, Nante. So you passed from me and now it's my turn to start rambling, I guess. I'm going to try and keep this as informal as I possibly can do, and I hope it's going to be interesting to people who are listening, and I hope we're going to have a good discussion at the end of it. Let's begin just by defining what I mean in this context by disability, because I think that's probably an important place to start. And the definition which I use always is the Equalities Act of 2010, which defined disability as being either a physical or mental impairment, and they use the word impairment, so I will in places today, that has substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. So it's a very broad definition, and I think it's important that we all understand disability as being a very broad definition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Disabled NHS Directors Network. I'm going to talk a little bit about disability in the NHS. I'm going to talk about my personal story, which is what Katrina asked me to talk about when she briefed me on this. And then finally, just a little bit about some of the practicalities of life in the NHS with a disability. I don't know if there are any people here today who, as Nante said, are here as allies rather than people with disabilities, but I think it'd be really helpful for everybody if during the course of this hour, you think about how your careers would have been different if you had had a disability. Because I think you'll find that there are key points where you have an option that maybe some of the rest of us with various different sorts of disabilities don't. So it's always useful to have a think about those things. So the Disabled NHS Directors Network was set up a year ago. We're nearly a year old now. We probably are just a year old. And we are the first national network representing NHS leaders with disabilities. There's never been any attempt to set one up before. Our membership is opening to board members or governing bodies of all NHS organisations, whether they're non-executives or executive. And for example, I'm a non-executive, but at least half the steering group and over half of the membership are executive team members. We cover a full range of disabilities, including, and I'm about to list very much as Nanti did earlier on, autism, hearing, long-term conditions, mental health, mobility, visual, and we also have a very good range of gender, ethnicity and geography. So we're pretty representative right the way across. Part of our job is to work with a wide range of national organisations to raise awareness, and the other part is to offer practical help and support to individuals who, for whatever reason, want some support. So, for example, we provide a mentoring service. We're in the process of producing some good practice guides, those sorts of things. And I guess what I've learned over the year we've been around is that we, all of us, need a life and a career, not just to be defined as the recipients of NHS services. And that's really important. That we're limited only by our aspiration, but on the other side, disability can sometimes be a lonely place to be. So I guess those are things that I'll cover all the way through the next few minutes of my presentation. Little bit just about disability in the NHS, just to give us a context that we're looking at. Across the UK, 22% of the working age population, or 14 million people, have a declared disability. The figures are actually probably higher than that if we take the broad definition of disability, because in the UK, unlike in the United States, we very often don't define mental health issues as disabilities. So it's probably a higher proportion than the 22%. Of those 22%, 80% of the disabilities are not visible. And again, it was something that Nanti referred to at the beginning. Only 17% of those people have their disability from birth, and the rest of them acquire them as they get older. And most people have more than one impairment. And again, I'll talk a bit about that when I talk about me, both of those bits. If you look at NHS workforce declared disability through the ESR, through the electronic staff record, about 3.5% of us declare we have a disability. But then when you look at the NHS staff survey, the figure is probably closer to 18%. And if you then match that across with the in-depth assessments that all staff had to fill in for COVID, it's probably closer to 20%. So actually, depending on who's asking the question at whatever time, you get a very different figure. If you look at the proportion of very senior managers, so that's so sort of exec directors and above, 2.8% nationally of very senior managers have a disability. 3% of board members have a disability. 2/3 of all trusts have no disabled board members, so no executive or non-executive members, and only 17 trusts in the whole country have more than one. And if you look at the national bodies like NHSE and I, only one of those organisations has one disabled board member. So the higher up you get, the lower the representation, which I guess is what you would probably expect if you look at, for example, the figures around ethnic minority representation as well. And until very recently, women's representation way up and down the chain. There were some very interesting figures coming out this year from the Workforce Disability Equality Standard, which said that, for example, we are 1.5 times more likely to be put into a disciplinary process than a staff member without a disability. 26% of us reported harassment, bully or abuse compared to 18% of staff without a disability. We felt 10% less valued than people without a disability. Had a much lower staff engagement score of 6.5% rather than 7.25%. So however you look at us, we score badly on all of those figures. And, you know, perhaps it's important, one of the things we might do at the end is actually to think about how we could actually do something about some of those things. So, for example, we know that the Freedom to Speak Up governors from the recent Nuffield report, all of the evidence suggests that ethnicity of the Freedom to Speak Up governors matters enormously as to whether people are trusted and will actually raise issues. I suspect the same is true about our representation of disability at that sort of level in organisations. So that's my fairly well researched, I hope, bit about what happens in the NHS more widely. So now to get onto the bit that I was actually asked to talk about, which is me, my background, and does having a disability make me a better employee stroke exec team member stroke very senior manager, however you want to describe me. So let's get on to me a little bit then. I've been a chair in the NHS for over 20 years now. I've chaired trusts providing community services, providing mental health and learning disability services, providing acute services, and providing combined acute and community services. So I've covered quite a range of different bits of the NHS. I have to say, I've never done a big teaching hospital, so your experience, all of you on this call, is slightly different from mine, but nevertheless. The most important thing I want to say is, now I've got onto the personal bit, is that this is a very personal account. Every single one of us with a disability has a completely different experience of our disability and of our lives, and we can't generalize just because I can do something or I can't do something. There's no generalization around that. So this is a very personal account. What I have learned, and I think this is something that I probably do share with a lot of people with disabilities, is that my lived experience is an important part of understanding what our service users go through in terms of their experience of our trusts. And I think that is very impossible. What I have also found is that it took me years to come out as a person with a disability. Most of us experience some sense of shame and weakness at accepting how others see us. And it can be a much more challenging experience to come out than perhaps it might appear to be. And perhaps once we've done it, we understand how important it is to have done it. We also all of us get labelled. One of my great furies is I fall over quite often. So on Tuesday this week, I was working with a housing association in rural Essex, and I fell over flat on my face in the mud, and I stood up covered in mud, and everybody said, "Oh, you're so brave." Well, I'm not brave. I can either give up on all my life and stop doing things, or I can sit, I can get on with it. I can pick myself up covered in mud and go back and knock on the next door. It's a choice we all make. And I guess that's a choice in different ways all of us make about living with our disabilities. It has made me an absolutely passionate advocate for diversity, for equity, and most of all, for valuing difference. I also, it's come to me quite slowly, and maybe that's my fault, but I do actually recognise that disability is slightly different from the other protected characteristics in the legislation. Because the reality for me is that there are some jobs that I simply can't do because I don't have the physical ability to do them. I could not be a porter, for example. I probably couldn't be a nurse on a busy ward because I can't stand for long enough. All of those sorts of things does make the approach to equity for disability very slightly different than most other protected characteristics. So what's my story? Unusually, as we said, 17% are born with a disability. I've had my particular illness since birth. I have 3 interlinking autoimmune illnesses. I've already said that each person's response to their to their disabilities are entirely different. No 2 patients who have the same autoimmune illnesses as me would have the same experience or same manifestations of their illness, but I'm going to describe mine, and then you can all see what you want to do and discuss that as you wish. I have lupus, SLE, I have Raynaud's, and I have Sjogren's. In my family, my younger sister and my mother have very, very similar histories, and often with autoimmune illnesses, you will see a family history, which is quite similar. In my case, the particular things I live with are, I am allergic to all fluorescent lighting and allergic to sunlight. You can see my skin is very, very white. It's because I spend my whole life wearing factor 50 sunblock and all of those sorts of things. if I am exposed to sunlight without that level of protection, I become seriously quite ill. I develop very serious flu-like symptoms. I have significant mobility issues, very common. As I said, I fall, I don't walk very far. I had my first joint replacement at the age of 50, which is very young to start having joint replacements. I have doubt there will be a few more if I live long enough. I have real problems with my skin. I suffer from chilblains. I suffer from mouth ulcers. I have no sense of smell. I can't drink alcohol because of the impact it has on me. I have very poor teeth because I have no saliva. My eyes have had very early cataract operations. When I was first diagnosed, I had a life expectancy of an average of 45 years. That has since then extended massively. And I'm well into my late 60s now, and I'm still going strong, and I don't intend to die in the near future. Mainly, that life expectancy was caused by liver damage and kidney damage in the early days of understanding that particular group of illnesses. And indeed, it's one of the reasons why I don't drink alcohol. No, not only can I not process it, it damages my liver and kidney very badly. The biggest issue for me is fatigue. I suffer massively from fatigue, and a lot of my life skills have been around how I manage that fatigue. When I did my first job, I remember at the end of the first day getting on a bus to go back home, and I fell asleep on the bus, and I woke up really dizzy at the terminus, got off the bus, was violently sick, and fell asleep on a bench. And that's a kind of very typical example of someone who has overdone it with an autoimmune illness. Not exactly the most attractive way to behave, and I suspect most people probably thought I was drunk, but you know. The other bit I just wanted to touch on very briefly was my experience as a carer of someone with disabilities. So my husband, who died 8 years ago now, had very severe bipolar and also early onset dementia. And I have to say, his mental health care was brilliant. His physical health care was, from my point of view, incredibly patchy. There were real does he take sugar moments where they would be talking to me and not to him, just because a part of his dementia was that he was in a wheelchair for the last 8 years of his life. And because he was in a wheelchair, people didn't talk to him. They always spoke to me. And I also found it really tough when I knew him better than the healthcare professionals knew him, and yet they were the ones who were defining what was right and what was wrong for him. And I found that really infuriating. For example, he had constant urinary tract infections, and I would want a dose of antibiotics and then out of the hospital as quick as I could. They would want to admit him so that they could have it nicely and safely in the environment of a ward. I knew he'd cause chaos in the ward because he hated being in the ward, so it was much better from there, but it was always a battle, always a battle. My own healthcare has actually been very good. I have very, very few complaints about the NHS and my healthcare. The one thing I would say is that it has constantly made me the recipient of services rather than me the owner of my own health problems. And I think that's probably, again, something that most people with a disability would understand. As an employee in the NHS, and I guess this is probably true at whatever level in the organisation you're at, I would say mostly it's not been that good. Let me just give you a couple of examples. All chairs are appointed on a fixed term basis, and their contracts are renewed at the end or not at the end of that fixed term basis. I have twice had regional directors asking my colleagues, not me, if I was well enough to do the job to have my terms renewed, which is kind of the most insulting of all. It would have been so much better if they'd come and said to me, are you well enough to do this? And actually we could have had a conversation as an adult to adult. And it's very much, it's for me the equivalent of the, do I take sugar? No one asked me. Very infuriating. I have also never, in my time in the NHS, been asked about reasonable adjustments. I have always had to demand them. And as a most recent example, I stated I had a disability on an application I made. I stated during the recruitment process that I had a disability and that I couldn't do stairs. And on the day before I started, in the first day of my new job, they rang up to say the office was on the first floor and there were no lifts, and was that okay? And I think it's just because people genuinely don't have it at the forefront of their mind. So am I a better person? Am I a better chair? Am I a better non-exec board member for all of that? I have no idea. It is part of me. It's always part of me. And I don't know what I would have been like if I hadn't had those autoimmune diseases. It probably makes me slightly more empathetic to other people's health and to their needs. It certainly makes me driven by efficiency, because I don't have the energy or capacity to do something in an inefficient manner. So, for example, my father always used to laugh at me that I was going for a lazy person's load. You know, when you really load your arms up completely because you can't be bothered to go back and do a second journey. That was always me, all the way through my life. I always try to seek the most efficient ways to do things, and it probably makes me a better problem solver, which is probably a good thing. It certainly makes me more stroppy, and I think that's probably a good thing. Chris, my husband, was a political campaigner before he became ill with dementia. And even when ill, when he was in his wheelchair, one of his favourite weekend treats was to go off to the local department store where they had those queues. You know those queues that snake backwards and forwards up to the till to pay? They're never wide enough to get a wheelchair down. So he would sit at the top end of the queue and wait, calling for a manager until the manager came. He would make them completely dismantle the entire queuing system and would then explain, actually, he didn't have anything to buy anyway. It was a point of principle he was making. And I used to love that experience. I would go with him and just join in and help. So I think having a disability very often makes you stroppier. I, like most of us, get completely fed up with shielding. I'm meant to shield. I don't shield all the time. And probably having a disability has given me a degree of resilience and has enabled me to build my support structures earlier than perhaps people who don't have a disability. And actually, for me, there's a really great bit about working from home, about agile working, about all of those things. Because I'm sitting here at the end of a camera, you don't know I have a disability unless I choose to tell you. And it's a really interesting change for me, whereas if you saw me walking down the corridor, you would know perfectly well. So it's a really interesting change for me. I thought I'd just end a little bit on some of the experience I've had in the last 2 trusts that I chair, just really to give you a little bit of some stuff to get us talking about things that we might do better, all of us. So just to begin with, one of the trusts I chair is in Buckinghamshire. In Buckinghamshire, a very wealthy county, not unlike Cambridge in some ways, very wealthy parts, other parts not nearly so wealthy. We have a difference of 17 years of healthy life expectancy between the poorest part of the county and the richest part of the county. So between the centre of Wickham to Chalfont St Giles, you have a 17-year difference of healthy life expectancy. It's an 11-year difference in life expectancy, but it's the 17 of healthy life expectancy, which for me is just extraordinary. And so understanding disability, whether you have one or not, is absolutely key to health inequalities and what we're doing about health inequalities and how we're tackling those issues. I've found personally that networks are really key tools for supporting me, for giving me the confidence, the awareness, the learning, sharing the experience. At Princess Alexandra, we have monthly disability awareness training courses run by the network. And anyone can just drop in and come along and talk about the experience and what they see and what they don't see and what they understand. We have champions. Each division has a disability champion whose job is to constantly remind everyone in the division. We provide in both trusts, we provide coaching as a key part of support for people with disabilities so that they can actually develop their skills and their confidence. We particularly recognise in both cases that the experience of our disabled staff reflects what our patients tell us. So if I say poor access, poor parking, all of those sorts of things, those are the experience of our service users, our patients as well, and we need to recognise that all the time. On reasonable adjustments, I think we often only see reasonable adjustments as something that you make at the time somebody joins the organisation. In truth, we all know that what we actually have is fluctuating needs. They change. They may change quickly, they may change slowly. And we need, in my view, very strongly, and this is something that the Disabled Directors Network is campaigning on, we need to have fluctuating adjustments. We need to have a review process so that actually we can begin to meet those needs on a really good and sensible basis, rather than just saying, well, we gave you that must be enough. Lump it. So I think the issue for me of fluctuating adjustments is the thing that I most think we need to really, really, really think about at the moment. And of course, with that, this being the NHS, comes the capacity of how you pay for those things. It's never easy, but we need to really prioritise that decision-making process. So that's kind of me done. I'm very happy to open up to talk about anything anybody wants to talk about. And I hope that sort of was useful on one level or another.
Hattie, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all of your personal story and the challenges and frustrations, and also some of the really brilliant things that your disabilities and health conditions have taught you, and particularly like that you are more stroppy. I enjoyed that story of dismantling the queue just to make a point. I like that a lot. And the other thing that really struck me was your point around being a recipient of healthcare rather than being an owner of your health condition. And I wonder if that just speaks to everybody who works clinically or non-clinically in whatever capacity we engage with our patients around how we make people feel, whether we're dishing out healthcare as a package, or whether we're enabling and facilitating people to be their whole selves and managing their health conditions. So thank you. I've really enjoyed listening to you talk, and I hope other people have too. We've got some time for Q&A, question and answer. So for anyone who is listening in, there's the Q&A function down at the bottom, along the bottom of your Zoom. I think it's at the bottom. It's at the bottom for me. It might be in a different place if you're on a different kind of device. It changes if you're on phones and that sort of thing, but hopefully you can find it. So do type your questions in there. Alternatively, you can put your hand up using the function on Zoom as well, and we can unmute you and allow you to vocalise your question if that's preferable. Just while people are doing that, I wonder if I could start with a question, Hattie, if that's okay. I'll take the privilege of being here and being off mute already. I can see we've got some members of our Purple Network in the audience. Is there any advice you would give them in terms of developing their career and pursuing those goals and developing themselves?
So for me, the most important thing has been actually getting people to understand what I can and what I can't on occasions do, and just being completely straight about it. I think fundamentally that's the most important thing. I think lots of people are very scared of disability, of long-term health conditions, of all of those things, and don't understand, as with an awful lot of equalities, don't have a language to ask those questions. So the more straightforward we can be about them, the better, really, in terms of actually enabling us to get our careers progressed. It came to me as a great revelation when I discovered I could do things like walkabouts, which is something that all chairs are expected to do all the time. I could do it on my mobility scooter, and I could whiz along the corridors at a rate of knots, causing chaos. It's about actually being able to own those things, and that in the end is what actually builds your confidence and everybody else's confidence.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question here from Ewan Cameron, who's our Chief Operating Officer and also our executive sponsor for the Purple Network. So Ewan asks, what are the most effective things that you've seen allies do?
That's a really good challenge, Ewan, thank you. I guess part of it is not to make assumptions. You know, very straightforward thing, but don't assume you know what I can do and what I can't do. Ask me all the time. Don't use language that emphasizes what I can't do. Use language which looks at what I can do. And fundamentally, I suppose, shouting with me about what I need. Those are fairly simple things. There are lots of things we can do at an organizational level, but this is much more about a personal level, isn't it? And those are the things that at a personal level I most respect and want from my allies.
Great, thank you. I hope that was helpful to allies who are on the call with us. Polly's just put a question, a comment in the chat saying, being open about what you can and can't do is probably something that people with disabilities are better at than those without disabilities, and we've all got a lot to learn from that principle. I think that's a really good point, Polly. Thank you. I've got another question here from Charles. What are your views on people whose disability means that career development is being obstructed by poor career pathways, as the next job up is not suited, but our skills are not being used or developed into a role that supports rather than damages a condition?
So my views quite simply are that can't be acceptable, can it, for any level of reasons? And you know, I acknowledged at the beginning there are some jobs that I simply can't do. I couldn't do something which requires a degree of physical skill and dexterity that I just don't have. So I have always seen an obligation on me to find alternative routes and to make sure then that I call on the organisation to support me in that. And that has been really important for me. That probably is the way we all need to look at it. That's not taking responsibility away from the organisation, but it's saying, this is what I can't do, this is what I can do, so how are we going to develop a career path that enables me to get to that next step? And I think it is really important that we share that responsibility by using our knowledge and our skill to actually define what we need to get to the next step. And then the organisation has a legal obligation, apart from anything else, to respond to that in a reasonable manner.
Great, thank you, Hattie. I've got another question from Breeder. How can we all educate or help managers who just don't get it?
Probably the biggest challenge of all, isn't it? It's always the biggest challenge of all in any form of work around EDI is how to get to the people who don't get it. You know, such a challenge. You know, the simple answer has to be never give up. You know, it always has to be come back the next day with a different way of presenting the same thing, and so on and so on and so on and so on until you're blue in the face with it. But it has to be, you know, for our own sakes, our own individual sakes, we can't give up because no one else will understand if we give up. So it's about, therefore, it's about how we have the resilience and how we have the support to go on doing that. And that's why I said at the beginning that that whole issue of networks is so fundamental to supporting us, to giving us the courage to go back, to finding other ways of presenting the information, and even, if necessary, to be there behind us when we're making those demands, those explanations, and saying, actually, she's not mad, she's quite right, this is an issue. So just, you know, if the worst comes to the worst, you bring other voices with you, other people's experience with you. I had a really nice email this morning from someone who'd recently joined the Disabled NHS Directors Network to say, I can't believe how brave you all are. Am I going to learn to be this brave? And that's what the power of support, that's what the power of network does for you, it seems to me. So that's why I would really strongly advocate that you make sure you have your own individual support structure, but also within the organisation, you have that kind of support structure as well.
Absolutely. I think it can be tiring, can't it, to have to keep fighting your own corner, and that is where
Tiring and boring and depressing on occasion. Let's be honest about this. It can be all three of those things. But if we don't do it, no one else is going to.
Yeah. And that support of other people around you is so key, isn't it? Even if their lived experience of their disability or health condition is different to yours, there's probably still a shared experience of the frustrations and the boredom and the challenges. So that's great. Thanks, Hattie. And
yeah, I mean, I genuinely believe there is more that unites us than divides us. You know, I think that's really important always to remember when you're looking at allies. And maybe I should have said that to Ewan. Maybe that's part of the answer to Ewan, that there's more that unites us than divides us.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. I've not got any other questions coming through at the moment, so I thought I might just ask one, if that's okay. You've obviously had many years in the NHS and experience of leading at a really senior level. Where have you seen people really get this right, and are there things we can learn from that?
Well, this is the wrong answer to give to an acute trust, I'm afraid. But for me, the best place for patients at the centre of everything, for patients creating their own pathways, all of those things, is in mental health. In my time of chairing a mental health trust, we had a service users council that was seriously powerful in terms of the organisation, that took seriously the whole issue of the empowerment of service users so that they owned their own services and so on. And, you know, certainly my husband's mental health care was staggeringly good. And I think those things are, so my first example would be to say, mental health is pretty good. And I think, you know, beyond that, I had a friend for many years until he died about 10 years ago who had polio as a child. And he always argued that, you know, his healthcare had to be in the best possible place, and that for him, that was University College Hospital, London, one of the great teaching hospitals like Cambridge University, until one day when his consultant said, would he mind if he brought a few students in to have a look at him? And my friend Roger said, no, of course not. And as the consultant brought the students back down the corridor, he said, now I hope you'll be really interested in this poor man. He has the most superbly deformed body I've ever seen. So I think sometimes the best quality health can be completely undermined by the complete incapacity to understand some of the issues that people with disabilities face day in and day out.
Yeah, and the power of language is really strong.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. I have to say, we all teased him for many years as being a man with superbly deformed body.
Brilliant. He'll live off that for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just off the back of that, and then I'll come to a question from Polly. What would you recommend or what would your advice be about language? I think we often find people get tangled up with language and are scared about using the wrong term or saying the wrong thing. Is there any advice you would give to people on the language front?
So, I mean, always, you know, the short answer is if you're worried about what language you use, think about how you would feel if it was applied to you. And I think that's the fundamental learning point, you know, that if somebody said that about you, how would you feel? So if somebody says, oh, well, that's Hattie, she can't do so and so, she can't do such and such, she can't do, you know, I would, you know, anybody who had that said about them would feel disabled, disempowered, you know, separated from the rest of society. So it's always better to use language which doesn't make people feel those things. So always try to use constructive, positive language rather than language that emphasizes what you can't do. I have a dear friend who's seriously dyslexic. He refuses to allow anyone to say he can't read. He just says he reads differently from the rest of us. Yeah. And I think it's about always turning it round and recognising what you can do.
Right. We've just been doing some work actually around neurodiversity, and again, really focusing on the strengths and the talents that people bring, and actually there's so much that having a neurodiverse brain brings that that we don't necessarily always see, because we can be easily done to focus on the problems rather than all of the strengths and talents.
Absolutely. Yeah. And trying then not to define jobs that pigeonhole people into a job that they can't do, but try to define the job into something that they can do.
Absolutely. And the NHS is so broad that, you know, there's so much scope for people to move around, isn't there? You're not stuck in one particular route. Great. This question from Polly is quite long, so I'm going to read it out kind of word for word, if that's okay. So Polly says, I was particularly struck by the proportion of disabilities which are acquired rather than congenital. People with changing abilities and fluctuating health conditions must have additional challenges around the continual process of reasonable adjustments. What advice would you give to someone in this situation for designing a dynamic support plan or adjustment scheme? And she says, I appreciate this is a broad question.
It's a very broad question. So when I started the job that was on the first floor with no lift, my response to that was, on a good day, I might be able to walk one set of stairs, but which way do the stairs go? Do they bend to the left or to the right? Because in the truth, I need to have a handrail on the right-hand side. So my first lesson would be, think very hard about specifically. Don't say, because someone is dyslexic, they therefore need X or Y IT program, but actually talk to them about what their dyslexia means and really, really, really understand their dyslexia rather than your assumption about dyslexia, because that's a really bad starting point. But then the second of which is to recognize that actually there are lots of things that we can do that actually make a really big difference. So for example, I know that if I'm unwell and I'm having a flare, having the capacity to sit somewhere very quietly for 10 minutes and doze at lunchtime makes all the difference to me getting through the day. So again, just actually being able to say, I need to go to sleep now for 10 minutes. And when I wake up, I'll be absolutely fine. But you may think I'm bonkers, but actually that's my way of managing my energy limitations. So again, I think it's about seriously understanding, and then understanding that as with all of us, everybody with any form of disability will have good days and bad days. And it's then about managing those issues. An example for me would be, a really poignant example for me would be that at Bucks Healthcare, we have the National Spinal Injury Centre as part of our services, and therefore we deal with people who are very long-term spinal injured. We have a particular person who's been an associate board member with us, who's part of our charitable trust, all of those things, who was blown up by a bomb in Bosnia about 20-something years ago now. Now, he has a particular problem with ulcers, with skin ulcers. And on a good day, he can sit in a meeting. On a bad day, he has to lie in a meeting. So actually, we need to check with him at the beginning of each meeting as to how he is physically, and then make the adjustments that are necessary for that meeting. So it's about, I mean, my answer to your question is, it's about constantly checking and asking, and not waiting for the disabled person to say, actually, by sitting for an hour and a half in this meeting, I'm going to be seriously ill because my skin is going to start breaking down. It's about actually checking in advance. Does that answer the question, Polly? I hope so.
Give Polly a moment to come back on that one, or maybe have a secondary question if there's a bit of follow-up. She says, thank you, that was really insightful. So we'll take that as a yes, you've answered that one. Great. Any other questions from anyone? Do put those in. Nante, was there anything you wanted to ask Hattie?
Yes, I'm just listening. Thank you, Hattie. So well articulated. I have a question. Where do you see, you've said your experience working for the NHS. I want to put a 5 years and say, where do you see NHS in supporting disabled staff? Are we going in the right direction, or are we just having conversations?
So I think we're going in the right direction. Is that entirely because of the goodwill of individual trusts? No. I think it requires quite a lot of national leadership to get us there, and I think that's quite important to recognise. So, for example, I'm conscious that people like the Workforce Disability Equality Scheme actually do have significant sums of money that they can use to help trusts do particular pieces of work. They do have the power to encourage us to do better. Things like the National Staff Survey, all of those things actually do have a significant impact on individual trusts. And so I think it's a combination both of individual trusts, I think it's a combination of national legislation, and I think it's a combination of national leadership of the NHS that creates it. Do I think we're going to have moved 1 million miles in 5 years? No. But, you know, I hope we will keep moving forward. And sometimes I see fabulous examples, particularly, I mean, interestingly, Katrina said it, particularly I think around neurodisability, where there is, and neurodiversity, where there is so much being done at the moment, where for the first time we're really beginning to understand some of the impacts around neurodiversity and those sorts of issues. So I think it'll be slow, I think it'll be patchy, and I guess I want us all to keep our warrior outfits ready for when we need to do battle again.
Yes, thank you. And I think having these webinars will come and recharge and go out again, because it is tiring and very long.
It is tiring, Nonte, yes.
Yes. Lonely and depressing.
Yeah, and that's where the networks and things are so important.
Yes.
And our own personal support networks, our families, our friends, all of those things.
Yes. Yes.
Nante, can I ask you a similar question of, as co-chair of the Purple Network, do you feel like we're moving in the right direction and that improvements are being made?
We are moving very slowly, but we're going to a good direction. And yes, change is coming. Change hasn't really arrived yet, but change is on the way. There's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of talk. A couple of years ago, people wouldn't come to me and say, no, I have dyslexia as well. And have you noticed me do this and that? And sometimes they're shocked that, yeah, I noticed. And people, we have now open conversations about our disability. And a couple of years ago, people I've worked with for years, we didn't have that conversation. So yes, we are moving very slowly to the right direction. I'm hopeful.
And absolutely, Nante, the point you make about 2 years ago, we might not have had those conversations. That's why I began by saying coming out is so important. Because unless we come out, we will never have those conversations. I meant to say, look, I'm wearing a purple scarf, especially in honour of your purple group.
Excellent. And if you'd been here a week ago, Hattie, you'd have seen we lit
all
up our
been
chimney.
Wearing purple. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And we lit up our chimney in purple as part of Purple Light
Well
Up.
done. Well done.
We've done that for the last couple of years, which is always a really nice symbol, I think, across the hospital campus.
Absolutely.
Of our support of our staff with disabilities and health
And
conditions.
your chimney is pretty impressive too, it must be said. It's a very big chimney.
It is. It stands out. It certainly stands out.
Yeah.
I've got another question here from Breeder. How do we prevent people from judging us always on how we are on our bad days?
Sorry, I'm about to cough. So, I mean, sadly, a lot of that comes down, as usual, to our own responsibility. It's around challenging those assumptions, isn't it? It's around reminding people that on the good days we can do different things and so on. But it is also part of, and I feel this very strongly, it is part of that whole bullying and harassment culture that the NHS sadly still has within it. And, so when it happens, we need to be calling that out as bullying and harassment. We need not to take it lying down and being quiet. But sadly, as Nanti just acknowledged, that can be tiring and isolating. So again, it's about making sure that you have the right support before you start doing it. But it does happen all too often. And sometimes I don't think people even mean it badly. I think they mean it to help you. But it doesn't help. And I guess that's the bit that we would all acknowledge. And maybe we don't challenge it on a bad day. Maybe we wait until we're in a strong position and then we challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And just picking up on your point on support networks, Charles has put a comment in the chat saying, when he was stuck at home and not given enough work, that's when he joined the Purple Network, and that was what gave him people to talk to, and people sharing a similar experience of, a lot of the network, I think, was shielding, and again, experiencing that isolation and loneliness, and the Purple Network was a real source of support, hopefully, for people.
So I think that's really important to acknowledge. I know that our at Bucks, the membership of our network doubled during COVID, during lockdown, for exactly that reason. So I think Charles is probably not alone. I think there are probably lots of people who've found the power of that kind of support from the network as being really important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's all of our questions for today. Just while we're talking about the network, Nanti, do you want to tell people a little bit more about how they can get involved with the Purple Network if that's something that they would like to?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Hati. I'm taking away, I wrote it down, do better. Thank you. Very well articulated. Yes. So we still have monthly meeting, virtual monthly meeting for the Purple Network. And you can join by emailing purplenetwork@addenbrooke.nhs.uk and just say, oh, you'd like to, you don't even have to say, oh, I'd like to join and attend meetings. Just pop us an email and say you'd like us to just, keep telling you what we're doing, Aurelia, and you can share those email with your department as well. Brilliant. And I believe this will be uploaded, would it, Katrina?
Yes, yeah, so we're recording today, so if you know there are colleagues who would have liked to be here and haven't been able to join us live, then do look out for the recording details, which we'll send around, and we'll make sure that's available. And thank you, Hattie, for letting us record you and share that internally with our CUH family.
That's fine. I guess, go from strength to strength is what I guess I hope for all of you.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Hattie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, everybody. And go and have good weekends.
And do better, Hattie said.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care. Bye.